you could spend money thinking it's the next best thing. It's not, buying a new set of paintbrushes isn't going to turn you into Picasso. It just isn't. You've
Yes.
got to
Wise
learn. You've
words.
got to. It's not because I'm anti anything, technology or anything. I use the stuff I use, but I would rather know why I'm doing something rather than just like, I'll just blindly go out and buy this plugin.
You're listening to the Inside the Mix podcast with your host, Marc Matthews.
Hello, folks, and welcome back to the Inside the Mix podcast. I am thrilled to welcome back today's guest, the legendary producer and engineer, Mike Exeter. And you may remember Mike from episode 68, way back when. 68, I think at the time of recording this, that might well be 2 years, where he shared his top tips for making a great mix. And if you haven't heard that episode yet, be sure to check it out for some invaluable insights into his mixing philosophy. And we're going to dive into that a bit more today. So he's best known for his work with iconic bands like Black Sabbath, Priest, and Cradle of Filth as well. Mike, thanks for joining me today. How are you? And welcome back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm all right, thank you. Yeah, I'm just thinking back to 2 years ago. I hope I'm as good now as I was then. And I hope I have the same thoughts about everything as well, in case I contradict myself, because that's never been known.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah.
Hands in the air, I didn't go back and listen to the episode before this. I should have done.
Much like most of your audience, probably.
Yeah. Probably, yeah, exactly. They'd be like, I didn't know Mike was on the podcast. When I look at the metrics, there is a point in time, yeah, exactly, where people start listening and downloading episodes. So if you have an audience listening, do go check that. I know there are some, because I've had conversations with listeners when they said it's one of their favourite episodes. So
Brilliant.
there is that. There is that.
Bribery does
I know
work.
it has been. Indeed. Mike's career has spanned decades producing and engineering for some of the biggest names in rock and metal, and expertise in crafting powerful low-end mixes has made him a go-to in the industry. And today we'll be focusing on key aspects of mixing. In particular, we'll be discussing the low-end techniques, bass frequencies, and everything in between. So, Mike, so let's start with the low-end side of things. One of the most difficult challenges, I think, that the audience listening encounter when it comes to mixing. It's often a question that I get asked: do you have any videos or episodes rather on mixing low end and the air quotes mud that people mention? In your experience, what's the first thing you should focus on when balancing the low end in a mix?
It's really tough, actually. There's just no easy answer. It's totally situation dependent. There will be people who will say you need to choose whether or not the kick drum sits above the bass or vice versa. And there's people who say you should side chain the bass off the kick drum. It's sort of almost any and all of the above. I may have mentioned it last time. I tend to take the Andy Wallace approach, which is to focus on getting the kick and the snare sounding as big as possible in a dense rock, what's going to become a dense rock mix. I would get the kick and the snare sounding as big as possible, sit the guitars in either side, and then deal with the rest of it. I kind of set my stall out, I guess, by having the kick sounding fantastic, in my opinion. And then once I've got the girth of the guitars supporting that, then I feel that the bass finds its own place. I have had some complex conundrums of sorting out. Some of the projects do tend a little bit more towards the Geezer Butler approach of bass playing, where it's got to be more melodic. It's got to play more of a lead bass kind of role. So you've got these aspects where the bass needs to be heard, but it also needs to support. I find the tool that helps visualize, because I do mentor people, I think the tool that's helped me visualize sitting the bass right has been something like either Sonox Claro or FabFilter Pro Q3, where you can actually have two instances sat. You can sit one on the kick drum and one on the on the bass, and you can see where there's a build-up of resonances because they kind of look at each other's frequency response. That can be quite interesting because you can sort of dip out a little bit of something in the kick, which is just below the fundamental of the bass, and push the bass, and you can sort of do this opposite thing, and you can sort of make the two coexist. You're not trying to make anything disappear because that would be horrible, but you can just sort of pitch away a couple of dB either way, and of course a couple of dB on one direction and the other, on the other track, you suddenly dealt with 4 dB of problem. So I don't think having visual aids hurts. And again, probably repeating myself from 2 years ago, because I am on a loop, having references, but references like using adapter AB, where you can load in your references, and you can actually, again, you can see a spectrogram of what's going on in their mixes against yours. Because I think we've got these tools at our disposal to help us navigate this. So why not use them? And I think we have a massive correlation. We have this reinforcement that goes on between visual and audible stimuli. So this goes to why I don't believe Atmos for music is particularly enjoyable, because you need the two things to reinforce each other. Atmos works brilliantly in a visual medium. I think Atmos in an audible medium, people have to point out what they've done, which takes away the reason for having done this amazing Atmos mix, because they're going, look, it's appearing back there. Whereas you're sort of drawn in that direction by the visuals. So I think being able to, when you're learning, when you're continuing to learn, as we all do still, being able to visualize something and correlate that to, I wouldn't have said that was 90 hertz. I would have put that higher, because surely the fundamental of an E playing on a bass is 40 hertz. So surely it's 80 it's actually 90 that's causing the issue. So it's all these things. Just reinforcing visually what you're hearing, I think, is really important. But then taking it to the other thing, it's using devices like a little radio and Oratones. Hearing what the bass is doing, what the top end of the bass, what the top end of the kick drum's doing, making sure they coexist. And then the sub sort of takes care of itself, really.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in what you said there.
I might have to listen to that again.
There's a lot of... I'm going to cough. There's a lot of good advice in there. It's interesting you mentioned there, you start with, just to recap, the kick and the snare oftentimes, and you get that balance going on there, then you're moving the guitars around that, and then you bring in the bass. But what you mentioned there about the visual aids is really interesting. So you've got Pro Q3, and I know Isotope do something similar, because I use that myself. Isotope do, much like you said there, you stick an instance of the Isotope EQ on the channel, and then you can see where the frequencies are potentially conflicting, or you get that resonance again. So really interesting. And also about where you mentioned looking at the reference track. And I use something called TDR Prism, which is a free frequency analyzer, much like you mentioned there. And then you can look at that low end. And I was doing it just this week when I was moving into new territory with genres. And I was thinking, okay, well, how was the low end response of this particular? And what do I need to do to get something similar to it? So visual aids, I'm definitely an advocate of. So I think it's great advice. And I think because there is that, you see this on sort of forums online and threads, and you'll see the classic archetypal response of use your ears, but that doesn't mean to say you cannot use visual aids to help you. They're very, very useful.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't. I think the frightening thing, I think we all know it. We've had graphs on EQs for decades now. I think one of my big things is to stick with the courage of my own convictions. I believe in what I have done. I trust in it. I stand by all the moves that I make. So I'm definitely not one to make a move and then look at a graph and go, blimey, that looks wrong. Lots of people are. So you have to be wary. You have to go, okay, I'm just going to listen to this now. I need to make sure that I'm not fooling myself. But ultimately, I think one of my pet peeves, I'm still on this one. We may have touched on it before, which is the most destructive piece of technology ever, the high-pass filter. That will
I do
screw
remember.
up. Yeah, that'll screw up your bottom end. My big thing is, if there's a dearth of music out there where if you put it on a big system, it doesn't punch you in the gut. Now, it may sound brilliant on your laptop speakers and your AirPods, but it doesn't punch you in the gut. And you've got to be able to enjoy the music. This is where, if you do sort of jump genres and, God, try saying that, jump genres. If you do that and you go into a club, which obviously I'm far too old to go into now. I'm not allowed in clubs. But if you go into a club and you hear the pounding bass, you feel that pounding bass, I bet they still sound good on laptop speakers, because people aren't frightened in that environment to mix with bottom end. You've got to mix with bottom end there. Your speaker system will roll off what it can't produce. So don't worry about all this mud that is apparently the antichrist of mixing.
Mm-hmm.
Turn down the bass if you don't want it, but don't just get rid of it, without consequence. Listen to what that filter's doing to you. Filters have a really strange effect at that crossover point. You can put a filter on a certain frequency and you can put a low shelf on the same frequency, match the crossover points, and you can listen to the destructiveness of that filter. It does something weird. It'll turn a beautiful acoustic guitar into a nasal sounding guitar. Whereas you turn down the bottom end on a shelf and it just reduces the bottom end. So you've got to do your listening and make your own decisions. But if you're struggling with bottom end, it's probably not because you've not filtered everything. I would say you've probably taken all the weight out of the track. Everything contributes to that solidity.
Wise words, because what you mentioned there exactly is what I was researching the past few weeks with this move I'm making with this particular track, and it was exactly that. And I sent the track over to a friend of mine to have a listen. He's like, it's lacking, it needs extension down into the low end, because I was being too conservative. I wasn't rolling everything off, but I was just being too conservative. And then I realized, actually, if this is going to be played back in the club, you're going to have the song before it, then my song comes in, and it's just going to sound empty. And it's it's going to lack that impact. Yeah. 100%. And I do recall that conversation about rolling off the low end, because it has been quite a mantra now going forward with regards to that. Because I've had mixes sent across to me where I've seen these 48 slope shelves where they've rolled off anything below 30 hertz. And I'm thinking, well, why have you done that? You cannot add what isn't there.
No.
It's crazy. But that might be, I suppose that could well be down to the dearth of advice in air quotes that you see online where people are advocating for these techniques.
I mean, I learn an awful lot from my mastering guy, brilliant guy called Pete Hewitt Dutton. He works out at the bakery in LA. He was a Metropolis guy over in the UK, and he moved out there. And he and I have long conversations. Every time I send something to him, we have a conversation, and ultimately I always learn something. But he's putting a filter on at 15 hertz. He's literally cleaning up the bottom. He's very rarely taking any bass out of my mixes. If anything, he may be punching something up at about 800 for a bit of extra solidity. We're talking half dB here and there. But he's not doing a lot to it. He's looking at it going, no. He always says, no, your mixes have got a lot of bass in them. He says, but there's nothing wrong with them. And that isn't him blowing smoke up my backside. He's saying, no, they're solid. I like what you do. So I figure if my mixes translate across everything from in-ears across those things to big subby systems, I'm okay. And I think there is a little bit too much information coming from the wrong places. It's the clickbaity stuff. You've got to have the 5 things.
Yes.
5 things to clean up the bass in your mix.
Yeah.
Funny enough, I've just done one of those.
Exactly that.
But it wasn't that.
Yeah, it is. You do see that, and it's YouTube. It's the thumbnails on YouTube where you see that, isn't it? It's like the shot. Like, I am going to be hypocritical here because I know I've got thumbnails where I've got a shocked face and it'll say do X, Y, Z. So
we all do it.
You do see those.
I think the important thing is that if you can research. The problem with any of this is you can search for the answer you're looking for, because it's all out there. Every single opinion is out there. YouTube will help with the algorithms. It will find you the answer you're after. I want to buy this. You're going to find the one that says it's the best thing ever. But I think if you can again have courage in your own convictions, get to know people who do a good job. There's great people all over. Ian Shepherd is awesome. He's over in Cambridge. Good friend of mine. Send him something to master. It's worth spending whatever his price is. I bet it's sub £100 to do a track. Get him to master a track for you and learn about what a mastering engineer thinks about what you're doing. The advice he gives will be absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's I'm definitely an advocate of that, and it reminds me of when I had Dom Morley on the show. Whoa, that's well over 2 years ago now, and he does the mix consultancy, and I've used that service a handful of times now. Just purely, it's worth spending the money just to get that set of ears on it, and the feedback he gives, then you take that forward into the next mix and think, okay, well, I know, because that's my particular style. It's the style of it's the way I'm mixing at the moment, and it just works wonders. Like just it's worth spending that additional bit of money to save you time as well, and it will expedite the process of you progressing as well. It's 100% worth doing.
It's definitely an advocate of that. And I think Friday's coming, isn't it? It's like, don't buy plugins. Give Dom some money. Or Ian's. Honestly, it's like, seriously. You're Dom Morley. He's great, but you could spend money thinking it's the next best thing. It's not. Buying a new set of paintbrushes isn't going to turn you into Picasso. It just isn't.
Yes.
You've got to learn. You've got to. It's not because I'm anti anything technology or anything. I use the stuff I use, but I would rather know why I'm doing something rather than just like, I'll just blindly go out and buy this plugin. Because, they may be...
Yeah.
We've all got loads of plugins, but that's because we've got a tool set. And I'm not going to... I've spoken to a couple of developers recently, and they're like, oh, why aren't you using that plugin? I'm like, well, A, it's unreliable, and B, it's bloated, and C, it's got latency issues. And you didn't put this feature in, and this lot did, and I need speed. And that's the point for me. It's the ability to choose the thing that you need to get the job done at the time. But 99% of the time, I'm on Massenburg EQ, Massenburg compressor, and Timeless 3 for delays. I haven't got the headspace to go through looking for all these clever things. They all sound similar anyway. People say, don't you use... I'm on my high horse now, aren't I? People are like, oh, don't you use any sound toys? I'm like, no. But Echo Boy is brilliant. I mean, it's brilliant, but it can't do this. I've set up my delays. I set them up from scratch every time, like in the old days. Yeah, I am an old fart, but it's like you just... What does the song need? If you just preset bash, you're not giving it what the song needs. You're giving it an easy way to finding something that will do.
Yes, wise words again. And I think what you mentioned there about using those plugins, and I can hazard a guess and say you know them inside out. And that's the key, isn't it? It's like, before you go and think, okay, well, this isn't working, this particular mix, I'm going to go buy this particular plugin because the marketing says it's going to fix X, Y, Z. Whereas you probably you might need to go back and actually think, maybe I need to look at the fundamentals of compression first and know this compressor better before I think I need to buy this compressor because it's going to clean up whatever or improve whatever it is that I'm looking to do. So another one that I mentioned on the podcast quite a lot, because you can have, like you say, you can have these plugin libraries and just plugin after plugin after plugin. But if like you mentioned just now, you can have all these plugins or these different paints, but it's not going to necessarily make you Picasso. And also, I think as well, just I'm not going to get on the high horse myself here, but sometimes it's not even the mix. It could be the arrangement itself rather than the mix, but that's a different story altogether. A lot of the time, it can be maybe it's not the actual the mix itself. It could be the arrangement, but that in itself is you could probably go down a total rabbit hole with that. I think
definitely.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got another question here for you, Mike. This is only the second one, and we're already sort of 20 minutes in, so it always happens on the podcast. This is actually submitted by a listener, so a shout out to Ed Fitzpatrick here. This is his pain point. He says, when I'm mixing drums, I might get the low end to sound okay, but my hi-hats either sound too thin or dominate too much. How do you balance the low end with higher frequencies, especially when dealing with elements like the kick drum and hats? Is there an approach that he could take, or considerations? Maybe?
Okay, so I will. I've said I will tend to make sure the kick and the snare are the dominating forces in the drum kit until everything else comes in. What I'll then do is make sure that the cymbals, the overheads, are performing their function. So I'll make sure that the cymbals are doing their thing of bringing a little bit of air into the drum kit when you need to on either side. You're getting that excitement, and hopefully the drummers played some really nice, tasteful cymbal work. The hi-hats will be in there, but the hi-hats will be within balance because hopefully the drummer knows how to balance his hands to get the cymbals to work properly. The hi-hats and the ride cymbals are generally on separate tracks to give me direction. So what I've tended to do over the last many years is I'll go for a wide. It's almost like an ORTF-AB kind of thing, but I'll go for a wide spaced pair of cardioids, equidistant from the kick and the snare around the axis of where they are. But I don't want to be doing an XY because that will bring too much of the centre. So I don't want the snare to feature so much in the centre because I've already got 3 microphones on the snare generally. So my overheads will become a picture of the kit, but more focused on cymbals. So I know that if I still need to check phase or polarity for snares and kicks and toms and all that, but I've got this really nice top-end record-like cymbal work. What that doesn't do is give me any direction on the hats and the rides and little splashes. So what I tend to do is I'll mic up the hats and the rides, and when I'm recording, I'll push them up into the mix going to the converter and pan them on the return to where I feel that they're showing me where the actual instrument is. They're not meant to stick out. If you mute them, the hi-hats become indistinct. If you bring them back in, they focus. And all I'll do is I'll make sure there's enough of the attack, take out maybe the bow part of any cymbal is the bit that's a bit clangy. I call it the gong-like sound. So it's not the edge and it's not the bell. It's that bit in between is where they get hit, the hi-hats, and they sound like really horrible mid-rangey low-mid sound. I'll just scoop that out. I'll get a wide bell shape curve and scoop it out a bit. And I'll keep playing with that as I'm recording until I get to the point where all I can sense is that the hi-hat now has a position in my stereo field. I recorded enough of it that if I did have to push it, I would, but I don't need to. And I do the same with things like the ride. So I create the individual microphone recordings to be part of the overall cymbal wash. So I've got that thing where I'll do all of the shells first when I record, and then I'll move on to overheads, hats, rides, rooms, and stuff like that. So I treat them all as kind of one instrument. It all comes together with the rooms or the kit sound, but my main thing is to make the hats just feel like they're this thing that they take over from the rides or they take over from the garages. They're handing off to each other. So incredibly, my hi-hats will be really bright sounding, but they're not too loud. And they're in a position in relation to the overheads where they're already leaking everywhere else in the room anyway. So they're just adding a little bit to it. It's a balance thing overall. I would say If you're worried about the kick to the hi-hats, get rid of the hi-hats, get the rest of the kit sounding good, and then see what happens once you start to bring the hi-hats in. Is there something in the overheads where the hi-hats are too loud? In which case, maybe you should notch something out in the overheads if you want to push up the hi-hat mic. It's so difficult without hearing it, but it's all about the various things all contributing. And it is a logarithmic thing. It's like a multiplication, or it seems like it. It doesn't sound like addition. You put two mics together, and suddenly it's like, wow, that's really compounded the problem. So you do need to start pulling back by 1 dB here and there. A 1 dB notch in an overhead can have a huge difference to a sound.
Yeah.
But I would say if he's getting a chance to record, use condenser mics, because the problem I find is a lot of people relegate the hi-hat mic to 57s, and you get that 57 sound. It's like snare mic. Under snare mic should always be a condenser for me. You're trying to pick up some fidelity. It's not a throwaway track. So make sure the recording's as good as possible. I mean, one of the most amazing things we've got are things like Toontrack Superior Drummer. Like, talk about well-recorded drums.
Yes. Very good.
Listen to what they sound like, and then try mixing them.
Yeah, it's a fantastic piece of kit, that.
Yeah.
So it's fair to say then it's quite a lot of EQ. I say quite a lot of EQ moves, but there's subtle EQ moves going on to
some are subtle
to sort of differentiate the different elements.
Yeah, honestly, I mean,
again, I suppose it depends on the recording.
God, if you saw some of my overheads, sometimes it'd be like, well, there's nothing there, but it's like, well, there is, but I don't need that amount of stuff there. My cymbals just need to go. It's like the hi-hat just sound like an aerosol spray for me. It's like there's all these.
You know what? I agree with you on that one.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was thinking this the other day when I was mixing, and I was thinking the hi-hat, and I was thinking, and I was altering it, and I was thinking it got to the point where it literally was just like that sort of sound. I was like, no, that sounds right. That's what I want. But when I looked at it, I was like, it doesn't make sense, but audibly it does. So I guess that's the whole, if it sounds good, it is good, isn't it?
This is it. Mantra. I mean, I remember Nick Watson, he's a mastering engineer, Fluid Mastering. I brought down a couple of tracks to him, it's got to be nearly 9 years ago. How the hell do you get your cymbals to sit in that amount of guitars? I went, I EQ the snot out of them. And he went, but they sound great. I went, yeah, because the guitars are taking up everything underneath. So, of course, they sound great. There's got to be room. I mean, people forget it's a mix. It's like, I'm not going to do that thing where you don't listen in solo, but you don't listen in solo. I do loads of stuff in solo, but ultimately, that's to check that I've pressed the right button, or I'm trying to find something and I'm not sure what that is that I'm chasing down. But ultimately, it's still about pulling out the faders and rebuilding the mix every now and again and going, that's doing exactly what I think it should do. That's great. And it doesn't matter what you do to get there, as long as the end result sounds as natural or appropriate to the genre. It's again, you listen to Superior Drummer, those drums sound incredible as a programming thing. I program with them all the time doing my work with Tony, but I have them coming up multiple outputs. So I have aux inputs in Pro Tools being fed from the plugin, and I mix them like a drum kit while I'm programming, because as soon as you start getting Iommi guitars in there, there's no way you can deal with the drums as they were. They sound fantastic. They're a brilliant recording of drums in a room. It's a bit like the Stephen Slate samples. They sound great in a mix, but they're so hyped if you actually listen to them. Most people would discount them. I can't program with Slate because they're hideous to listen to. But I might put them in with the actual MIDI drums when I'm trying to get a hyped demo together. So it's like, as you progress, you've got to just listen to everything in context, and that's what helps you determine what the end result's going to be. It's like you said about the arrangement. It's all about arrangement. Getting it to sound right in the arrangement is a great learning thing. I'm really lucky to write songs with people like I write songs with, because they've been doing it so long. And I've learnt so much from that attention to detail. And it starts there. It starts with that writing.
Yeah, most definitely. I do have a question off what you mentioned earlier. This goes back to the beginning of what you were describing there. You mentioned 3 snare mics. This is a bit of a tangent here. So you got one at the top, one on the bottom.
I've got
57
on the top.
I'm
2 on the top.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So what are the 2? Where are the 2 on the top positioned?
Right, they're right next to each other. I haven't got it here. That was a shame. My assistant 3D printed me a brilliant little thingy adapter.
Nice.
So I go between what the dynamic mic's going to be, depending on where I am. It can be a M69, a 201, or a 57, or a Audix i5.
Yeah.
I bought and fell in love with a microphone called a Beta 181. It's a side-facing. Looks like a little lollipop. Looks like it's got a Shure Beta 57 body, but when you get it in person, it's like a little shrunken version. The whole thing is about 10 centimeters long. It's a side-facing condenser, and it's one of the best snare mics I've ever come across. Because I used to stick the KM84 next to 57. I like what a condenser, a small diaphragm condenser, does on a snare. It just opens up the whole capture. I'll put the 57 or the dynamic or whatever next to it, and I closely phaser line them. I actually use a little radial phaser unit that does it in the analog domain, so it literally just phaser lines them. It's not a time thing, it's actually absolute phase. And I tend to favour the 181 most of the time. It's awesome. I did try someone else's microphone last Christmas. I won't mention who they are, but it's touted as the next big thing, and it was okay, but it was about as useful to me as the 421 is on Tom's. It's too big. You can't get it into the place you want, and it didn't have any sonic benefits over the 181. So to me, it's like it's horses for courses. It all comes down to a great snare and the appropriate snare for the actual job as well. I mean, I did a session recently. I had Carl Brazil, he plays with Robbie Williams and Blunt and various huge sessions. He's probably one of the top session players in the UK. He turns up with about 14 snare drums because why not? Because it's like, what do we reckon about this track? This one's got a bit more of that. Do you think that'll work? And the way it responds for him. So it does come down to that level. Now, listeners may say, well, that's all right for you. You got him coming along doing that. But it doesn't stop you from maybe having 2 choices. And that, again, comes down to that snare drum mic thing as well. It's like, by having 2 snares on the top, you can change the sonic characteristics between verse and chorus. You can do verse, pre-chorus, chorus. You got all these choices. And to go back to the 3 mics underneath, it's usually the KM84 because it needs to be a condenser and real attention to phase, just to make sure that you're not losing.
That was going to be my question. Yeah, most definitely. 14 snares that's quite impressive. I mean, that's a boot full of snares.
Yeah.
I'm not a I'm a guitarist, but my drummer, when I was in the band, he would have loved to have had. He's a proper Dream Theater fan, so you can imagine his drum kit, what that would have been like, and he would have absolutely loved to have 14 snares.
Yeah, I mean, we only used 2, but they were there. I mean, you see, for me, it's like for cutting through dense guitars, I don't think anything beats like a copper or a bell brass. I don't think wooden snares really cut through guitars. Not at the level when you've got thickness. But, again, I'm proved wrong by certain snare drums. But I think if you... back in the real world where we're all kind of having to also do sessions with people who haven't got access to all that and endorsements, I got myself a Tama SLP, I think it is. I got a stainless, and it's so different to the wooden one that my mate's got at the studio I use a lot that we've now got a choice of 2. And That's kind of enough choice for some people. They'll go, oh, I kind of prefer that. That's more this style. Whereas if you've only got one, you'll never know whether or not A would be better than B. And I think just by having a couple of choices, you don't option yourself to death. When I'm talking with Carl, we're like literally going into, okay, well, if this was to happen in this part, then that's going to get lost. And most of us would just EQ it.
Yeah.
But the fact that he can then eke something else out, he's at the top of his game. But it doesn't hurt to learn from the top. So we can all aspire to take that attention to detail. But he is fucking boring with his snares.
When you said 14, I was just like, wow, I can imagine that conversation.
Well, do you know what? It's like you get to that point in the session where it's like you're about to go for a take and suddenly he'll go, what about this snare? And it's like, oh, Christ's sake, yeah, we decided that 20 minutes ago. Can you just play the part? But he's brilliant.
Yeah, I can imagine, man. Yeah. We're coming towards the end now, but I do have one question, and this is totally off piste here, and this is off the top of my head here, because being a guitarist, and I was of the when I was gigging and whatnot, I'd had the 6505 on top of a Mesa cabinet, but proper metal, as it were. But since I'm now solely in the studio, yeah, exactly, I loved it. It was fantastic. Clean tone was shit, but apart from that, it was proper loud, man. It was good stuff. We had that in an angle power left and right.
Wow.
Yeah, it was loud. We played in drop B as well, so it was heavy, but it was good. Melodic metal. It was.
Was
good
it
fun.
in tune though? But in drop B.
You know what? I remember playing one gig in Belgium, and I was just like, I'm going to try some slightly lighter strings this time, and I did that, and it was just totally out. It was totally out. And I was like, I don't know why I did it. It was one of those ones where I was like, yeah, this is a good idea. I'm going to do that. And then we start playing. I was like, mate, can I use your backup guitar? My guitar's fucked. Yeah. And for the rest of the tour, I was using this backup guitar, which incidentally sounded all right. It had EMGs in it. It did all right. But what my question was going to be is you mentioned there you're tracking with Tony, for example.
Yeah.
Emulations, guitar emulations. I've been using the Neural DSP stuff, which is pretty good. What are your thoughts? Are you still doing like a hybrid approach? Or are you using emulations? Or
I can't lie anymore. The Guitar World has literally just come out in the last 2 days, and one of the big highlights in it, I must put big plug for this one. There's a full front page Tony article, and I've got 3 pages in there apparently. So,
ooh, nice.
But Tony's told the world he's using a Kemper.
I was going to ask, has he tried the Kemper yet?
Yeah, we have actually been using a Kemper. We've been using one since the pandemic, but we do use amps as well. But what the Kemper's allowing us to do is quickly move between sounds. So I captured, I think, his best amp ever, which again I talk about. It's the golden goose for me, is his TI-100, which was the one that was made... His custom amp was, I think it came out in 2012. Certainly we were using it in 2012. I think it was 2011 to 2014 he used it. And this thing was basically an evolution of the Soldano to the Eddie Van Halen Mark III to the TI-100. This amp is insanely good. So I did some profiles of that, but I also paired it with the right speaker caps as well, because the best sound we had out of it was not the 412 that came with it. And that wasn't for any reason other than I think I was too lazy to shift the 4x12 when his custom one came out. So I left the Eddie Van Halen one in there. And that just stuck. So I've been using a lot of and the nice thing about the Kemper is you can load IRs into it as of a few RSs ago. And speaker responses are a massive part of the sound. So for me, the reason we use the Kemper is I've got him a sound which works for him. I can move incredibly quickly because I can have it set up with the editor on my computer to give him different sounds. So he'll go, "Just what about trying this on this part?" Or I'll say, maybe if we went for a clean tone here and we try that, I can dial him up a sound and he doesn't have to do anything. He can just try a part, and then I can bang back into the main riff sound, and we can actually create our songs without having to worry about recalling an amp setup or something. Now afterwards, I may go back and reamp, and it'll be a reamp appropriate to the riff, but it's very, very, very much a tool that gets a job done. And to be honest, when we do shootouts from time to time, he'd never use one live. If he was going out live, it'd be straight out. Having said that, he did last year for the ballet, but before that, we did a Hollywood Vampires show, and he just used a TR-100 with a 4x12, and it blew someone else's rig off the stage. So, and it was only on 4, but it's
amazing.
For the studio, it's what he responds to. Now, I've already caught a load of flack for something recently which said it all sounded digital and horrible and blah blah blah. So now the fact he's gone public and said it's a Kemper, I'm probably never work again. But to be honest, all of these things work brilliantly. They're tools to do the job. I use 2-notes stuff for when we're using real amps. I use the Neural DSP plugins. I haven't used a Quad Cortex yet because I haven't needed to, but they're all brilliant.
Yeah,
they're excellent, and it's what gets the job done.
Yeah, agreed. I use the neural stuff, and I think they're fantastic.
Yeah.
The neural DSP emulations. I think I've got the Petrucci one. If I remember right,
that's awesome.
I think that's the one I've got. Or I might have had the Gajira. one. I can't remember.
They're all really
Either
good.
way, they sound great.
I tend to fire up one of the ones like the 14, one of the sort of the real basic ones, and I'll just dial stuff in because it's like, well, that's really cool. I like that. But sometimes I'll put it through the 2-notes genome cabs because it's like I just want a bit more control over what cabs I use. It's like use everything. It's brilliant.
It's flexibility, isn't it? It's like you say, if you're in the studio, you're songwriting or whatnot, just being able to just and then switch to a different flick between sounds and just try stuff out. It's a lot easier than whipping back into the room and then moving the microphone about. Or swapping out cabs or swapping out heads and whatnot.
Well, I think also to not labour the point, it's like the sound that the guitarist is playing to doesn't always suit what the track needs. So, but if you can give them something that's inspiring, if you've got a DI and they've performed it well, you can take it back and you can take the essence of what they've done and you can just tweak it a little bit to make it work. And that's really good. I don't do it a lot. Most of the time I'll be doing it because we started a track a couple of years ago and we may go revisit for something and the guitar sounds different or something, or we're not sure where we were, so I'll just reamp the whole track and I'll get it close and I'll EQ the DI. But there's very, very many reasons for using that technology. It works, he loves it, and he's at no point has he ever said, oh no, that sounds really digital. It doesn't.
Yeah, I think that's the thing when you see comments and stuff on various things that you put online. I think some people just like to have a bit of an axe to grind, I find sometimes, but I can get on my soapbox with that.
I ignore it now. Yeah, I'm not on socials much anymore.
Yeah. But when is that episode of Guitar World's coming? This episode is going to be going live in December, so the audience will be listening to this in December.
It's as of November the 6th, Guitar World magazine came out this week. I don't know if you can get it on the shelves. I've been to 3 WH Smiths and can't find it anywhere.
Really? Guitar World? I'm amazed at that. Total Guitar? Can you still get that? I'm assuming
Hasn't
you can
that
still
just
get
shut
Guitar.
down?
Has it? No.
I know.
That was my Bible when I was learning to play the guitar in my teens. Oh, the amount of Pantera riffs I got out of that.
Of course. Oh. No, I think. I think I'm hoping I'll get a physical copy of it. I've seen the PDF, so that's good. Yeah, but it's a really interesting article. It's quite funny listening to him giving away some of the secrets. Well, they're not really secrets, but I'm like, blimey, wow. Yeah, we're going to get vilified.
And mate, I could, yeah, that might be the. If I find it, I'll buy it, and it'll be the first magazine I think I've bought in a very long time. But Mike, it's been a pleasure having you back on the podcast. It's flown by.
Yeah.
I mean, for anybody who wants to learn a bit more about what you're up to, what you're doing, you said you're not on socials much, but is there anything else you want to plug while you're here?
No, I mean, at the moment I'm on now. I'm on the socials. There's not much activity.
Yeah.
I kind of Instagram's probably the one that will have any activity, a flurry. I might even put up a picture of the guitar wall thing. I've got a website, MikeExeter.com. I am still working on bringing Production Mentor to life, which will be a kind of a mix with a master style thing, but kind of an in-person learning how to record and stuff. But I mean, pretty much, MikeExeter.com.
Fantastic.
I better
stuff.
update it now,
that link in the episode. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Be a picture of a 4-year-old.
Yeah, I'll put a link to that in the episode notes.
Right.
And audience listening, if you haven't done already, I mentioned this at the beginning. Go back and listen to episode 68 as well. And you'll probably listen to that. And my delivery is probably totally different to what it is now. When I go back and listen to the older episodes, it's quite interesting to see the way the podcast is delivered. So it's always,
I'll tell you what,
especially when I go back to like the first 10s.
I bet I've only sworn twice. I bet last time it was a complete full of it. I've really toned myself down. Yeah, this is toned down.
Amazing. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure having you back on. And I know the audience is going to love listening to this. It's been great.
Great stuff.
And again, we'll do round 3 at some point maybe in a couple of years or whatever. I think that's what it is. It seems to be every 2 years.
It probably is,
when I get people back on, which is mad. Yeah, which is absolutely crazy. That'd be 5 years of the podcast then. It's already been out 3.5.
Well, that's really good, though.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, cheers, man. It's 3.5 years. It'll be 4 years in February 2025, which is quite a feat, I think. So
brilliant.
Exciting times. Either way. Anyway, I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll catch up with you soon. If you've enjoyed this episode, I want to hear from you. Click the link in the episode description. Click the SpeakPipe link and leave me a 30-second audio message. It doesn't have to be 30 seconds, but up to, detailing why you enjoyed this episode and why you would recommend it. And also, give yourself a shout out. And as an added bonus, each month I will draw a lucky winner from a virtual hat to win a coffee voucher on me. And if you don't like coffee, just give it to someone else and pretend you gave it to them. So, click the link in the episode description, and I cannot wait to hear your episode recommendations.